I just have a couple of slides to introduce the session and give an overview of software, just because people will have different backgrounds, different levels of experience. Some people might not have used software before. So I want to show kind of some of the reasons that we might do that. And good evening to you all. It's early in the morning here, but I'm very happy to be with you all. Okay. So I spent a long time in my research doing analysis of qualitative data. And for me, the challenge is really the volume of data that qualitative research produces. When you're dealing with, for example, as Hiram was saying, transcripts from, say, semi-structured interviews or focus groups, doing document analysis, you can end up getting a very large amount of data. And what you need to do is to somehow summarize that in a way that you can make sense of it and use it to answer your research questions. But you also want to preserve the richness of that qualitative data. One of the most powerful things about qualitative research is it can give so much insight into very complex issues. And so a method of analysis needs to help you find those interesting things in the data, but make sure that you don't lose what makes it special in the first place. And when you're able to do that, then you're not able just to answer your research questions, but to illustrate them. And by that, I mean to find quotes and extracts which kind of prove what you want to say about the data and show the trends that you see in there coming to life. So one of the example projects that we have on there is a real semi-structured qualitative research project that I did, which is quite a kind of standard small project. There were 12 semi-structured interviews. You can actually download these. They've been anonymized, so you can use them for learning qualitative research from our website. But to give you a scale of the kind of data that this generates, when we transcribed those 12 interviews, and they were mostly under an hour, we ended up with 58,000 words to analyze. So something like a master's thesis worth of words to read. It even takes a long time just to read it all. In the end, we ended up coding 87% of that data. So much of it was used in some way. We created 75 topics or descriptive themes based on a very basic descriptive coding guide. And to those codes, we added 3,160 coded sections. So that shows you kind of the scale of the work that's needed. And doing this is a manual process. Level of descriptive analysis. I'm going to describe all of those processes in a little more detail, but I want to give you a sense of the issue with dealing with this much data. So how do you analyze this? What do you do with it? So I've come back to saying that analyzing qualitative data is about reading it. You have to understand it, and to understand it, you have to read it, and then read it again, and then read it again in a different way. In fact, if I have one tip for analyzing qualitative data, it would be to keep reading it until you know it almost backwards. And that's a very important first step, because it lets you get a sense in your head of all of the different things that different people are saying, the different topics and themes that are coming out for it, and the things which are surprising and interesting to you. And until you've read through all the data, that you can't really get a sense of the overall picture. But there are some ways which we can help with that reading process. One of them is coding. We're going to look at some other approaches as well, but mostly today we're going to focus on coding. And that's basically a way to identify themes and topics in the data. So a theme might be something like, for example, family, or it might be working together, or it might be technology or something. And then categorize text to these themes. So read through the data and say, okay, that section of text, that's talking about family, that's talking about technology, that's talking about something else. And the other alternative approach is to not create those themes in advance, but do what's often referred to as grounded theory or emergent analysis, where you let the data, the text, create those new categories for you as you go along. Now, there are very many different ways that you can do this coding process. A lot of people will use a paper-based method. So you may do it with post-it notes on the side of your transcripts or on a large flip chart. You may do it with different colored highlighter pens. So you read through the transcript, you select a piece of text which is about your family theme, and maybe your family theme is blue. And anyone talking about their family or issues about the family will code that section of text with the blue highlighter. You can also use kind of standard software. So you can use word processing software like Word. So here we've just used the highlight feature and the comment feature in Word to go through and do the same thing. So to identify sections of text which are about different topics and themes. And you can also do the same in Excel. So you can have one cell in Excel or your spreadsheet software which has the a sentence in or paragraph from your transcript. And then you can either, you can have other columns which suggest what themes are in there, or if it belongs to a particular theme. And that way you can go through kind of paragraph by paragraph and assign the text in a table to codes which help you understand the different themes which you have within the data. So these are basically different ways of managing the data. And the challenge is always with qualitative data, how do you manage it? How do you cope with that large amount of data, and how do you cope with the themes? But there's also specific software. This is either called CAQDAS, Computer Assisted Qualitative Data Analysis Software, or sometimes QDAS, a Qualitative Data Analysis Software. And these are tools specifically designed to help with the analysis of qualitative data. So what is CAQDAS? Well, it's basically a database. So it's a piece of software that manages your different data sources. So these may be your different transcripts or whatever data you have from different participants or documents. And it also helps you to speed up that coding process of assigning bits of text to a particular theme or code. And it also helps you to explore the data and will generate reports and graphs that summarize what you're doing there. So what are the advantages to using specific qualitative software? Well, first of all, I'd say, for me, the most important thing is that it has a very good memory. It can keep track of all of your sources, all of your codes, even if you have hundreds of them, and can remember where thousands of sections of text have been put, hundreds of thousands of sections of text have been put. And what that means is it's very quick to go back and find that later on. So you can search for particular words that you want to. So if you wanted to see every time someone said the word family, you can do that. And there's also the option for quote retrieval. So when you've gone through and you've assigned sections of text to those themes, you can very quickly find all of them. So if you wanted to read everything that you've coded to family, it's very quick to find that. If you wanted to read everything you've coded in one particular source, you can find that. If you wanted to find everything that a particular subset of people in your responses was saying. So for example, if you wanted everything that the men in the project were saying, or all the women with the project were saying, or everyone over a particular age, or everyone who lived in a particular area, then you can just go and see those particular quotes and see how they compare. It can also be a much more neat process, I think, especially when you're doing corrections. So you have an undo and redo option. And when you're working on paper to do analysis, that's a lot more difficult. You end up kind of using Tipex everywhere, or giving up and throwing away your paper and having to start all over again. But software obviously allows you to always go back and change your mind about things. And it can also be a lot easier to share or contribute in collaborative research with other people. So if you need to share with a supervisor or a colleague, you can just send them the project file and they can see exactly what you've done and why. If you've got a stack of paper, then that might be something that you're having to ship at great expense backwards and forwards between you. There's also an argument that it can help with rigor. So the software creates a paper trail of showing exactly how you've coded things, the themes that you've created, and the different ways that you've interpreted the data. For some people, that's a very important thing. This concept of rigor, I find, from a methodological point of view, is a very positive approach. It's not always appropriate for all kinds of qualitative research, but still, it does allow people to see exactly how you contributed to things, and allows people to challenge your interpretation of the data. So the sad thing is that while the software can be very useful and powerful, there isn't a magic button which you can just hit and then it'll analyze the data for you. There are limitations to what the software can do. It's not an automatic process. Even when you've created the themes and put the data in there, it can't decide what text should belong to which themes. It also can't decide what themes you should be generating for your project, what the topics of interest are. Because the computer can't understand your research project, it can't understand your research questions, and it can't really understand the text in enough nuanced detail to know what's going to be important and what's not. So it can't do the analysis for you. It's basically a tool to help your brain, to help you do the analysis and the interpretation. And for that, it is useful. But just in the same way that you wouldn't complain that Word is not writing your PhD thesis or writing a highly rated journal article for you, it can't write a report for you. It can't do your research for you, and it can't draw any conclusions from the data. So that's still a process that you have to go through yourself. So a lot of people will, especially if they've been using pen and paper methods for a very long time, many people have kind of criticisms about software, and some people will say that it's not appropriate for certain types of qualitative analysis. There is some merit to some of these criticisms, but generally there are issues with these criticisms. So some people will say that it imposes coding or particular types of analysis. I don't think it's true that the software is designed to do one particular type of analysis. There are lots of different ways that you can analyze qualitative data, and most of the software tools are flexible enough that you can usually apply any of them. And it doesn't force you to do coding, and I'll show you later how with Quirkos you don't have to do any coding at all. If you want to, you can just use the memo feature and you can just annotate your text and just use it as a reading and annotation tool. So although it allows you to do coding, it doesn't force you to do it. It's not the only type of analysis. There's also an argument that uses the distance from their data. So the software stops you from reading your data closely and gives you the impression that you understand it better than you do. I'd argue that that's a criticism which is dependent on the user rather than the software itself. So if you're using the software in a very rudimentary way, or if you're using it in a way which you're not going back and you're not reading the data, but for example, you're just extracting statistical data from the software, I think it can distance you from your data. But when used properly, the CAQDAS tool is designed to help you read the data more and to read the data closer and to read it again and again. And you'll see with the design of Quirkos, every function in it is designed to take you back to the data and to keep you closer from it. So it's something to bear in mind for, but I don't think is usually the case. There's also the argument that it results in the quantification of data. And by that, I mean, you can rely on, oh, okay, I've coded something to this theme twice as often as something else, so it's twice as important. Again, I would argue that that's about the user interpretation. The software can be used to quantify qualitative data. I don't feel in most cases that that's an appropriate use of it. But of course, it's entirely up to the user to do what they wish with it. Just in the same way that you could argue that any tool which is not used properly will not give good results, I would argue that the same thing is true for qualitative software. There's a really good paper by Jackson, Paulus, and Wolf, which refers to these as zombie arguments. So arguments which should have been put to rest a long time ago, but keep popping back up in the literature and won't disappear. And they have very good, much more nuanced criticisms of these criticisms than I do. So again, as I said, so I would say qualitative software is just a tool. Like this kind of tool, a Swiss Army knife, it tries to do a lot of different things, but it's up to the user to decide which things it's best for doing for your particular analysis, and to also learn how to use it well, just as if you were learning how to use a saw or a hammer or a paintbrush. That's just a tool, and you need to learn how to use it very well to become an expert at it. So I'm now going to talk about the Wolf and Silver 5-level QDA approach, just very briefly, because you can go to the website and read a lot more about this. But what they're saying is that generally when students come to learn qualitative software, they get very excited by all the different features and the possibilities of it. And they don't take time to stop and reflect and think, what do you need the software to do for your research? And what they ask you to do, and they have sheets to help you through this process, is to plan your analysis before you start, based on your research questions, the type of data you have, and what you want to do with it in the end. So don't think, oh, I have this tool, that means I can do this kind of analysis. Start the other way around, thinking about what you need to use the tool for. They talk about having strategies which drive tactics, and the strategies are what you want to get out of the analysis, and the tactics are how you're going to do that. And so they were trying to get you to focus on the components and the actions that you need to do for the analysis, and not be too excited by the features in the software. And there are a lot of different software options. So these are listed just some of the main ones. Some of these are free, some of these are open source. I have in bold the kind of the big three. So I would describe those as being Atlas TI, NVivo, and CAQDA. Those are the kind of the three largest ones. You've probably heard of those, but there are very many more out there. What I would say is they all work differently. They all have slightly different features, but they all do the same basic thing. Pretty much everything I'm going to teach you today in Quirkos, you can do in any of the other software packages. So it's a lot up to how you want to work and what you want to get out of the analysis. And then there's independent reviews available on the University of Surrey CAQDAS network. And I'll give a link for that as well, but it's very easy to search, to Google for. If you search for the Surrey CAQDAS network, you'll find that. And there's also a relatively new thing which has been around for just the last year or so, which is there's now a standard exchange format for qualitative software that there wasn't before. So it's very exciting to us who've been a long time in the field, but probably not very exciting if you're new. But basically it means that you can import and export your data from any software package to any other one. And they're currently supported by all of these different software packages, and more are adding support at all the time. So these are all the main ones and several of the smaller ones as well. And it just means that you can change your mind and bring your data from one software to another, or if you've seen something that you need to do in one particular software package, you can do that and then bring it back to another one. And the reason I mention that is that they all have a free trial. So it's possible to try all the different software packages and see which one works out best for you. I'm going to show you Quirkos today, but there are limitations to Quirkos, and I'll explain there are reasons that for some types of research you may want to look at other software packages. So QDAsoftware.org, that's the website that has a lot more information about the exchange format. But qualitative software can be used for other things as well. So we can also use it to do literature and systematic reviews, which is something that a lot of people will do as part of their research project. I would describe that literature as being a qualitative resource. It's essentially unstructured text data. So a journal article, a textbook chapter, or document and policy analysis, those are all qualitative sources. And grey articles as well. So grey literature that you find online to unpublished things. So PhD theses, master's theses, anything that you can find there. And although there are reference management software like RefWorks, like EndNote, which you could use to help you with a systematic or literature review, the advantage of the qualitative software is that it allows you to do a lot more insight into the data. So whereas reference management software is very good for letting you see, who wrote things and when, and keeping track of the database for doing your literature and bibliography later, it doesn't let you have a lot of nuance within the data. And I think that's what the qualitative software does, because you can then go through and code things. So you can have a theme for the different things you want to read about in the data, and then you can very quickly see how different authors and different journal articles or textbook chapters compare talking about those things. It also allows you to bring the literature and the research data together in the same thing. And for me, that's very powerful. So it means that you could bring your research data and, for example, a peer-reviewed journal article on your topic into the same project and code both of them. And we're actually going to do that today in the example. What that means is you can very quickly say, okay, in my research, I found this trend. But the literature would suggest something else. Or you could say, well, exactly, the literature is saying exactly what I expected to find here. And in that case, when you come to writing up, it's very quick to do that very important step of not just talking about your own findings, but talking about them in context. and how you're making an original contribution and how it's different to what other people are saying in the published literature. So there are many other uses for qualitative software as well. You can even use it to mark essays if you have a marking criteria. I've seen people do that. You can use it for document policy analysis. You can look at historical texts. You can also look at archives of qualitative material and do secondary data analysis. So you don't have to always collect your own data. There are repositories out there of qualitative data that other people have conducted and that you can use for your own research. Our example projects are one example of that, but you can find data on lots of different things. And you can also do social media analysis. So you can analyze what people are saying on Facebook or Twitter. These are all qualitative resources that you can bring into qualitative software, and you can find interesting things. So how do we analyze qualitative data? So I'm going to go through a very common approach here, which is about kind of a kind of framework analysis of coding qualitative data. But I'll also talk very briefly about some of the other approaches that we can have. So a typical guide would start by basically breaking this into kind of 3 stages. So I describe it as interrogating, summarizing, and then connecting the data. And the first stage, interrogation, is really to look through and, So to go through and read the data very closely. So that's interrogating it and then asking questions of that data. And then the process of summarizing, so trying to get down to the important things, and coding can help with that. And then the last stage is connection. So connection between the themes, what are different themes saying, but also connections between the different sources, different people saying the same things at the same time. Now there are very many different approaches that you can take here. So the most common would be this thematic or content analysis. So thematic or content analysis, basically what that does is it allows you to, it's the kind of most common way of doing it. It's a very basic descriptive approach. So you're literally seeing what people are talking about in the data. Did they literally talk about the family? Did they very literally talk about technology? The other option here would be discourse analysis. So discourse analysis is looking at what people say and how people say things. So is there subtext? Are there things people are saying which are not very obvious? Or if you read between the lines, are there things that people are wary about talking about? There's also these 2 kind of spheres of approach. So there's grounded theory on one hand, which is basically where you start with as fewer preconceived notions of what's in the data as possible. And then you build up based on what the data is suggesting. So you don't have an idea of what topics and themes might be there to start with. Grounded theory is used often to create new theory, to create new concepts. And it's especially useful when you're doing research onto something that nobody's really looked at before. So you don't have a good idea in your own head or from the literature about what the important topics and themes are, what explains behavior here. The other option is framework analysis. So this is basically the opposite, where you have a preconceived set of ideas about what different topics and themes are going to appear in the data. And you create that as a framework of codes or themes ahead of time. But there's also other ways that you can do. So these 3, so in vivo coding, IPA, interpretive phenomenological analysis, and line-by-line coding. These are ways to not code your data to start with. So ways that you can start by reading through the data. So in vivo coding, basically you use participants' own words to describe your themes, to create themes. In interpretive phenomenological analysis, you're looking at how people are constructing their concept of their world. And you're doing that by usually using a line-by-line approach. That's very common in IPA. And in Quirkos, you use the memo feature to do that. You don't have to create any themes. So whichever of these we choose, essentially the process is to develop a framework or a topic or list of these codes, code sections of data to them, to one or even more of these topics. So you may find a section of text which is about not just one topic, but several things, and then retrieve data at that topic. So that's actually, let's see everything that's under that node or theme. And then we want to explore the connections between the data. So that's that final stage. So interrogate, summarize, and connect. And those connections between the data will tell us interesting things like are particular people who live in this country saying different things to people who live in this country. So the software can help with this process. It can help you manage that data. So it can keep you all the data together. It can keep your topics and themes together. It makes that code and retrieve faster, and it helps you to visualize those results when you've been through and done all of that. And one of the options here, one of the options for the qualitative software is Quirkos. So this is one qualitative software tool that we designed to help with analyzing qualitative text data. And that's what we're going to demonstrate in a minute. It's designed to be software which is only based for analyzing text. So it's not very helpful if you need to use audio video. So that's why I mentioned you might want to look at other tools. But it's designed to be the easiest software to use, to be very simple, very intuitive, and to take a very graphical approach to the software. If you look at any of the other tools, you'll see they all look very similar. They all look like a spreadsheet, basically like working in a spreadsheet. But Quirkos looks very different. It has lots of colors, it has lots of bubbles, it works in a very different way. Quirkos is also exactly identical on Windows, Mac, and Linux, and it's the only software that does that. What that means is it doesn't matter whether you're collaborating with people who are using Mac and you're using Windows, or it doesn't matter if whoever is teaching you is using Windows or Mac. The interface and the capabilities are exactly the same. Now, the word Quirkos is a made-up word, but it's based on the Greek root of the English word circle, which is Quirkos, with QU on the front for qualitative. So as you'll see in a minute, it's about qualitative circles and bubbles. So what's the ethos? Why did we design this? We wanted something that was more accessible, that anybody who was doing qualitative analysis could use. So we wanted a very low barrier to entry in terms of the cost, in terms of how long it takes to learn, and also in terms of how many people can use it. So we wanted to do participatory analysis as well. So methods of research where you even have the participants come through and analyze their own data. And we wanted to people to spend more of their time coding the data, to reading and understanding their text, rather than spending a long time learning the software. So this is what Quirkos looks like, and this is why we call it qualitative bubbles. The interface is designed around these bubbles, which represent the codes or themes or topics of interest. What you can do is create these, choose the color, drag and move them around. So it's a very engaging, tactile approach. And when you're happy with that, you can select some text and drag and drop that onto one of the bubbles, and that codes it. And as you add text to the bubbles, to your topics, they grow. So the size of them here is literally showing you how much you've coded to each of them. So you're always getting a sense of progress and always a sense of what's coming out from the data. Now you can also do side-by-side comparisons in Quirkos. So here we're looking at what the men said in the project next to what the female said in the project. And you can very quickly see the difference in how people are talking about diet, for example. But also these views always take you back to the text. So what I said is that Quirkos is always trying to get you to read the data in different ways. So here it's trying to get you to read the data by gender and see if there's any difference. Now you can also look and compare the codes themselves. So this is a cluster view that shows you how often particular codes are coming together. And in this example, we have the themes for diet and healthy appearing close together. And what that shows us is that people seem to like obviously there's an association between the diet and healthy eating. So we've got these visual, also these live visualizations, which help you see connections in the data. You've also got lots of options to export your work when you're done. So you can create these reports as shown on the left. On the right, you can also create a Word file, which uses the comments feature in Word to do kind of color-coded annotations and highlights. And that way, at any stage, you can create a Word transcript, which you can print out, which looks exactly as if you've gone through and done it with colored highlighters, but with the added advantage of it being online in the computer, so it's much easier to search. And all the visualizations you can also export to PowerPoint, and you can also do CSV export of quantitative data. So if you wanted to bring that into SPSS or R to do qualitative analysis, if you're doing mixed method research, Quirkos facilitates that as well. Now, I also want to be honest about limitations. I know it's it's my software that I designed and I'm very proud of it, but it doesn't try to do everything. That's one of the designs of it. So it does only work with text, and I think that makes it a lot simpler. We find that, in fact, there was a published article which stated that approximately 80% of qualitative researchers only use text data. But it can be very useful to use audio, video, or picture data. And if you need to do that, there are other tools out there. It also, Quirkos has very little statistical analysis built in it. My philosophy is that you need to understand that very well, and that you should use a specific tool like SPSS or R or Excel to do statistical analysis. It's not really appropriate to do that in qualitative software, so we allow you to export that to do that. It's also designed for what I call real qualitative projects. So if you were doing qualitative projects where you had thousands of respondents, I would argue that's becoming a quantitative project. It's very difficult to pull qualitative data out without summarizing that in a statistical way. So the interface of it is designed for dozens or maybe 100 sources or something like that. So a typical qualitative project, but not when you start to have hundreds or thousands of sources. It also doesn't have a lot of features in it. It's designed to have a very few features that are very flexible. So when you've learned them, you'll understand how you can use them for different types of analysis and to visualize and explore your data in different ways. And that makes it a lot quicker to learn. Now we have lots of support options, which I'm going to go through very quickly. I showed you on the website. You don't have to register to get any of these. So you can download getting started guides and also manuals. There are video tutorials, including 1-minute videos, which just show you a little bit of what you need to do. You can also always email us from support, and we offer support via Zoom, workshops like this, and Skype. And this slide is sad at the moment. We do offer face-to-face training workshops and hope to again in the very near future. So a little bit about how the sources in Quirkos works and how the projects work. So Quirkos is designed so that all of your data is stored in one project file. And you can import any kind of source to this. So any text source, at least anyway. So you can bring in Word files, docx files, text files, rich text files, CSV files, and also PDF files. And when you do this, Quirkos creates a copy of these within the project file. So these sources become copied. So your original is not modified, and everything is copied into the project file. So it's all in the same place. Now, if you modify the original file, that means that's not reflected in the Quirkos project file. So changing something in the original file does not automatically change it in the project file because it's created a copy of it. What it does mean is everything is tight in one place and everything stays the same. Everything is easy to back up that way, and it's very easy to work with. Now, Quirkos has this concept of source property. So when you've brought in your sources, this is what we're going to look at today. There are lots of different ways that you can categorize it. So for example, you can look at the source types. So you could say, okay, this is an interview. This is a focus group. This is a Facebook post. And you can also use the source properties to keep demographic data. So for example, if you had one source for each of your participants, you might have demographic data like gender, like age, and location. There's also meta information that you can keep here. So for example, if it was an interview, when did you do the interview? Where? Do you have the consent form for them? And all these different things. You can also keep reference data here if you're doing a literature review. So reference data might be something like the journal, the author, the year, and this really helps doing your bibliography later on. And the reason that you can categorize the properties in the sources with these properties is that you can use them to subdivide the project later. So you can see everything by everybody who lived in Edinburgh, or all the men in the project, or just the data which comes from interviews, or just the data which comes from focus groups. Now, the other side of Quirkos is the codes. We call them Quirks in Quirkos, but they're the things, the unique little things that you're trying to pull out of the data, but there are also themes and topics which you can pull out. What these allow you to do is tag sections of text across the different sources, and it can be used for any kind of an analytical approach, specifically descriptive or theory building approaches, it doesn't matter. But you can also use them for meta themes, and tomorrow I'm going to talk a little bit more about how, rather than just literally describing what is in a text, you can also use it to categorize things that you're going to use to write up. So use it to keep track of your best quotes, or things on a particular topic that you know you want to quote. Now, Quirkos also now has a memo feature. This allows you to attach, it's almost like a little sticky note to the side of your text, to a particular section of text, which you can record either your own thoughts or themes. So that would be analytic text, your own reflexive comments. So I'm not unsure what this means, or I think this is a very important point. So your own kind of notes to yourself. So these might be thoughts, they might be questions that you want to investigate later. And they might also be discussions with other researchers. So for example, you might say, use this if you're collaborating with someone else, or if a supervisor has some questions, you might use the memo feature. But it can be also used for keeping a research journal. In fact, we have a new tool, the chat, which I'll show you can also use for this now. And this kind of is to keep track of your analysis process and what you're doing. Memos are also really useful for IPA, interpretive nomenclature analysis, in vivo or line-by-line approaches, which don't specifically use codes. Now, Quirkos also has new features for collaboration, which are quite new. So earlier this year, we launched Quirkos Cloud. And what that means is that the data can be stored not just on your own computer, but in a live cloud server. And that means that you can collaborate with people on qualitative projects live. So you can both be doing coding on the same project at the same time. There's no need to merge. There's no need to download a project and upload it again. And there's unlimited project sharing. So you can share with any number of people, and any number of people can work on the project at the same time. And with the live chat feature, just as there's the chat in Zoom, which I've been really bad and I've not looked at for a while, so I should bring that up just in case there are questions. There are lots of different ways that you can use the chat feature, but you can talk to other people in a live function and see if you agree with something, or if you've got any questions about how someone has interpreted something. And the Quirkos Cloud also allows you to access the data from any computer. So you can log into any computer. You don't have to be taking the data with you. Wherever you log into Quirkos Cloud, your data will be available and accessible. But that's enough for me. I'm going to stop with the slides now, and we're going to actually look and use Quirkos, and I'm going to show you around a little bit. So I'm going to stop very quickly there just to see if there's any questions at this stage.
Not yet.
Okay, that's great. Then I will get started with the demo.
Yep.
So the first thing I'm going to show you, great, I hope you can still see the screen, is how to download the software and install the software. So I'm on Windows here. It will be slightly different, obviously, if you're working on Mac or Linux. We've sent you a link to where you can download the software directly. If you just go onto the website here, it's actually on the front page. So try Quirkos today, download a free trial and see for yourself. You can also get it from the Get Quirkos button here. You can download for Windows, Mac, or Linux. So if you want to follow along at home, you're welcome to do this. But you can also just watch, try this in your own time. If you have any questions or get stuck anywhere, you can always ask me tomorrow. So I'm going to click here on the Download for Windows button. Click on Save File. And now that's downloading the installer to the computer. So this will take a couple of minutes, especially as I'm streaming video as well. And on the installation page here, you'll see you've got the option here to also create an account for Quirkos Cloud if you wanted to try that. So you do need to create an account, and you do need to provide credit card details even for the free trial, but it won't charge you, and you can cancel at any time. Or if you just want to save the projects on your computer, as we're going to do today, there's no registration needed, and you'll get a complete free trial. Now, as part of this, we're also offering a 1-month extension to the free trial. So you normally get 21 days, but you're going to get nearly 2 months. So you have plenty of time to learn the software and see if it's going to be useful to you. We're also happy to extend the trial for the cloud version if you wanted to try that as well. You'll just need to let us know about that. There's a video tutorial here and step-by-step guides to doing the installation here, but I'm going to talk you through it very quickly. So this is downloaded now, so I can just click to open this. It's going to pop up with the warning, are you sure you want to install this? Yes, please. And then there's a kind of standard install procedure. So you just need to click next to the buttons here, accept the license agreement, next again, and then choose where you want to install it. Okay, so this is, it's not working for me because I already have it installed and running. So it's got very upset. So when that's finished for you, it will give you an option to start Quirkos. And when you've started Quirkos, it should look a little bit like this. So this is the screen that you'll see when you start Quirkos for the first time. There's at the top the option if you want to sign in for the Quirkos Cloud. So you need to click on the Manage Account to create an account, or if you've forgotten your password. So the account management is here on the website. And you log in here and you can do lots of things with your account and also your projects online. But we're not going to look at the Quirkos Cloud today. We're going to have a quick look at that tomorrow. We're going to continue with local storage. I just wanted to stress again that there's actually no difference in the functionality between Quirkos Cloud and Quirkos Offline. The only difference is you can't do the live collaboration with the offline projects, but you can share the projects with each other and you can merge them together. So just click on the Continue with Local Storage button. Now at this stage, you'll get a message saying that there's a free trial and that you have 21 days remaining on it. And you just need to click Continue. There's also the box there to put in the license code, which will give you tomorrow to extend the trial. Or if you buy a license, then you'll be able to get that the next day. So what we get here is a list of all the recent projects that we've been working on. So we've got, these are recent projects that I've been working on. This again will probably be blank for you the first time you've worked on it. There's a little X here to remove any of these projects. That doesn't delete them, it just removes them from the list. So if you've moved that project, it's not there anymore, or you don't want to work with that project anymore, you can just use that X button there, but don't worry, it doesn't delete the project, so you can still find and open it again later. So what we're going to do for now is actually create a new project. So we can click on the button here, click on the new project button, and that will create a new project that we're going to work on today. The first box here is for the author. That's the author name. So for Quirkos to know who's done what on a project, especially if you're collaborating or you're going to share a project with someone, it asks you to put in your name. And this could be anything. So you might just have your initials here, like DT for Daniel Turner, or you might put Daniel, your full name. But you can change this on a day-by-day basis. And what it allows you to do is to see what work was done by a particular person or a particular author. But you can also use this in a slightly more flexible way. So you can also have Daniel a bit tired. And if you were doing some work, or for example, Daniel trying something new. So you might try a different type of analysis. And if you use the author way in this way, then everything that you do in this session today will get tagged as Daniel trying something new. And you can find everything done by Daniel trying something new, and you can remove it or you can delete it. So if you change your mind, there's a very quick way to see work that was done on a particular day. I've also seen people use this for on a particular period of time. So Daniel, first attempt at coding. You don't need to put a date in here because it will also, every action that you do will be tagged by the date. So it's very easy to find those as well. But you can use it to categorize different sections of your qualitative analysis journey. The second option here is password protection. That's fairly self-explanatory. So you've got the option here to put a password on the project. You have to put it in twice to make sure that the passwords match. And what that means is that it will encrypt the project. So it can't be read by anyone without the password. And if you're working with confidential data or you have data protection requirements, it means that the data is securely stored and encrypted. So there's no way that anybody can open the project or read any of the data inside the project file without knowing your password. The caveat that I have to give here is that you must remember your password. For GDPR and data protection requirements, we do not have any way to access your data. We don't have a way to remove a project from a file that would allow us to read other people's confidential data. So there's no backdoor, there's no way that we can give you access to a project, or we can access a project if you've forgotten the password. So please remember your passwords. It's the same for everything else, but there's no way that we can help if you've forgotten your password. The other option here is for structured question project. Now, structured question project is used when you've got a source of data where you've asked exactly the same questions to each respondent. And a good example of that would be a survey. So an online survey or a questionnaire where you had something like, how did you find this workshop? And then you have an open-ended section of text. And then you had another question saying, what can we do to improve the workshops? And then you had another area where people could type in their comments and their feedbacks. And the advantage of the structured question project is that you don't have to type in the project, the questions for each source as you bring it in. And you can bring in from a spreadsheet, so from an export from SurveyMonkey or an online platform like Qualtrics, all of your data in one go. Now, we're going to keep this off at the moment because the data we're going to work with comes from a semi-structured interview. So although we've covered the same topics with the different people that we've interviewed, we've actually asked the questions in a slightly different way. We have follow-on questions for some people. It's a fairly typical qualitative approach. And most people will probably keep the structured questions project off unless you do have a very structured qualitative data that you want to analyze. So when you've chosen between these three options, we'll just click on the new project here again. And that will open the standard project save dialog. And that allows us to choose where we're saving the project. So I'm actually going to put this on a USB drive I have here with the example data on it. And I'm going to call this Smartphone Project Workshop. So when I click save here, it's going to create a project called Smartphone Project Workshop .qrk in the location that we save it. And that project will be blank when we start it, but will eventually contain all of our coding, all of our themes, and all the sources that we've brought into the project. They'll all be kept in one small file, and that file you can back up, you can copy, you can email to yourself, you can email to other people. It's very easy to share. This is the only really place where it's different to the Quirkos cloud. If you're using on the Quirkos cloud, you don't get an option where to save it. It's being saved on our cloud server. But you still have the option to download that project as a file and move and email that around if you want to.